Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of burnout and mental health challenges, chronic illness and its impact on daily life, ADHD and neurodivergence, trauma, and emotional healing. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I am so excited for this conversation today. I am here with, oh gosh, I should have clarified how to. Gabrielle Juliano-Villani?
Yes.
Okay. And do you like to go by Gabby or Gabrielle? I meant to ask you that before we started.
I usually refer to myself as Gabrielle, but a lot of people call me Gabby. That's fine.
Okay. Okay, we can call you Gabrielle if that's what you prefer. If you haven't listened to my episode with my dear friend Kellen, it's episode 20. Kellen actually attended one of retreats that she hosts in Belize, which we'll talk about a little bit more later in this episode. But if you want a firsthand account of an attendant from one of Gabrielle's retreats, then definitely go listen to Kellen's episode. It's episode 20. But we are going to dive in with Gabrielle today. She is a licensed clinical social worker, consultant, coach, entrepreneur, and educator based in Sarasota, Florida. She has been in the mental health field for over a decade, specializing in stress, chronic health conditions, and trauma. After scaling her group practice to 7 figures and realizing her own burnout in 2021, she sold her thriving group practice and made it her mission to educate others on the impact stress has on our everyday lives. Gabrielle pulls from her experience as an EMDR and polyvagal informed therapist to utilize mind-body approaches to help others implement everyday strategies to manage stress and live their best lives. Gabrielle is an international speaker, retreat leader, and has been featured in Authority Magazine, The Daily Om, Bustle, and the Everyday Woman TV network. When she's not working, Gabrielle is teaching Zumba, surfing, or reading a psychological thriller at the beach. Oh, I love that. Hi, Gabrielle. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good conversation. We're going to do a little bit of lighter conversation than I normally do in here, but I would love for you to start with your practice you had before and how you got to that burnout stage. And yeah, let's start there.
Okay, so I'm an LCSW, as you mentioned, and I have worked in a lot of different spaces. I started my career working for Family Tree, which is an organization in Colorado, and they're a nonprofit that works with victims of intimate partner violence and stalking. And I actually loved that job, but paid like $13 an hour. So that was not sustainable.
Yeah.
So from there, I moved into working at Arapahoe County Department of Human Services, and I was a caseworker there. And that was the first time I got burnt out, which is no shock to anybody doing that type of work. And then I actually worked for Humana, the insurance company, and I did in-home care management for their Medicare Advantage people. So I helped them, I did like short-term therapy, I helped them navigate healthcare. And I really loved that job because it was remote and I did home visits with people. And it was super flexible. So it already felt like I was working for myself. And I knew that layoffs were coming because they saw what we did as like non-essential. So I was like, what do I do next? And my
Yeah.
friend, I'm going to start a private practice. You should do the same thing. I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. I've always wanted to work for myself. So she helped me. She was my mentor. She helped me get all set up to bill Medicare and help me introduce me to people to get clients. And because I had such a specific niche, I did home visits with the Medicare population in the beginning. I got full really quickly. And so I still can't believe I did this, but I was like seeing 28 to 30 clients a week doing home visits. So I was driving around Denver and Aurora and Lakewood
Oh,
and all
wow.
over seeing clients. And actually, one of my Zumba students, who is an occupational therapist, she's, I work with a social worker and she would totally work for you. You should just start hiring people. That's like the next way to build your practice. And so I was like, okay, I'll figure it out. And I hired her and that went really well. And she got full. So then I hired somebody else and that went well. So I just kept going. And before I knew it, I had 15 people working for me.
Oh, wow.
And I was miserable. I
Mm,
didn't do the work that I coach people on to do now about how to build and scale sustainably and all the things to have in place. And I was really struggling with setting boundaries and my own
mm,
people pleasing and codependency stuff coming up. And in 2021, we had already moved to Florida and I was on vacation actually in Hawaii. And I got a phone call from somebody and they left me a voicemail and they were like, we're interested in acquiring your business. Call us back. And I was like, this sounds like spam, but I'm also interested because I do want to sell my business because I don't want to do this anymore.
but were you going to run it from Florida then, just with all your employees?
Yeah, I was running it from Florida. We moved to Florida in 2020.
Okay.
Um, so of course, with the pandemic and everything, we switched very quickly to telehealth. So completely changed my business model.
Oh,
We have been doing
yeah.
Zoom visits with people, and now I had to figure out Zoom. And I did that all in a weekend. I remember that so clearly. So that's actually what helped me move here to be closer to my family. So I was running the business from here and everything was in Colorado still. All of my clinicians, all of our clients, and it was working, but I think it was my own stuff that I hadn't worked through. I was still seeing way too many clients. I was seeing 20 a week and trying to manage 15 people. And I did all the billing. Like I still did way too much work on the back end. And I was now 2 hours ahead, so that made it difficult
Mm.
sometimes with my staff. They would be calling me and it'd be like 8 o'clock here. I'm already like bra off watching Bravo with
Yeah.
wine. I'm like, I want to hear about work right now.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things really just contributed to it. And again, like my people pleasing and not setting clear expectations with
Mm.
people. And then that building resentment when people weren't doing what I wanted them to do, but I wasn't telling them what I wanted them to do. So all of that stuff just came to a head. And in the mental health world, there has been significant changes since COVID. And it was getting more and more difficult to find people to hire.
Wow.
Yet we had more clients than we knew what to do with, but more therapists were like going out on their own and didn't want to work for group practice and wanting more money, but we were insurance based and I can't control how much insurance pays us. So there was like a lot of things just brewing. It was like, I don't have space. I don't have the capacity. It's time for a change.
And I'm sure you're also doing those therapy sessions with your own clients. And sometimes, like, as much as that's what you do for work, and I'm sure you get joy out of that, that's also draining to hear the hard shit all the time, too.
And that was part of it too, is that in the beginning, I loved working with the population that I worked with. And then as I changed, I was like, this is not like my niche anymore. I really I was feeling like I couldn't set as clear boundaries with them either. I was feeling like I worked with a lot of older adults, so I'd hear like a lot of the same stories over and over again. There was like a lot of things that were draining that we none of us had no control over, and I was really wanting to work with clients who were in a different space and maybe more motivated for change. So I was feeling really drained from the client work also. which I always feel guilty about now. But I did. I would be on telehealth sessions and I'd be like, if I just click over here and start shopping on Amazon, is anybody going to notice? And that's a really good indicator of something's not good here. We need to hone in and maybe make some changes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's so hard. I'm a hairdresser and sometimes I come home totally drained from talking to people and hearing their things. And especially in 2020, it was really bad. So I can imagine that being your last year or whatever of doing that. It was hard. It was so hard because people weren't doing the normal things they were doing and seeing the normal people they were seeing. And so then they would come in and see me and dump all of the COVID stuff, the election stuff, like all the things that were going on at the time. And it was so hard because I was also dealing with it on my own personal level because I was out of work for 6 weeks and things like that. So it was a really tough time too. So I can imagine that maybe that probably added to it as well.
Definitely did. It was a weird time to be a therapist too because it was collective, right? Everybody was going through it. We're all going through the same thing. And so it was just in a weird space to be hearing that from every single client. Yeah, I'm going through the exact same thing you are. I'm not going to say that because this session is not about me, but it's all weird that you're like saying things that I'm also thinking. And
And you're expected to help that person with
yeah,
it, but you haven't even figured out how to help yourself with it.
I don't know what to tell you. I'm like wearing the same pajamas for 3 days in a row right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh man. So 2021 comes around and you get the call in Hawaii.
yes. And it's funny because, or is it funny? The universe
Mm.
delivers, right? So maybe like in March of 2021, I was talking to my friend who's also an entrepreneur and she's like my business coach and mentor. And I was just venting to her about everything. And she's like, why don't you sell your practice? And I thought, I don't think anybody buys like therapy practices. And she's, of course they do. You could sell anything. So we ran some like high level numbers, and I was like, that's not enough money for me. So then
Mhm.
we talked about some other things I could do to delegate more and hopefully help with some of that, which I did put into place, but it wasn't enough. And also, like looking back, it was clear that it was just like a sign that I needed to move on to the next
Mhm.
thing. So we put that on the back burner. That was March. July, I got the phone call, and that same friend actually, I texted her and I was like, some like random person wants to buy my business. And she's, you should respond. That's like how these things happen. I'm
Okay.
like, okay, then I'm gonna respond. So of course I Googled first. I was like, who are these people? Do they have a website? Is it legit? So I did some internet stalking and it was. And I get back from Hawaii and we had a call, and that was probably like August 2021. And then I met them in person September 2021. And then I signed on the dotted line and sold that bitch on December 31st, 2021.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So it happened very quickly,
Nice.
which
And how did you feel after you signed?
it definitely took a while to sink in.
Mhm.
There's this phenomenon that I don't even know if it has a name, but there's a really good article in The Atlantic about it. And it talks about things like this, where it's like a big life thing and there's all this anticipation. And in the article, they're talking to a New York Times bestseller, and that was like their number one goal was to get on the New York Times bestselling list. And when it happened, and their families congratulating them, and they were like, how do you feel? And the author was like, I feel nothing. I feel completely numb. And I was like, that's how I felt. I
Okay.
think there's like all this anticipation leading up to it. And then I also had to stay on for a year, which is really
Wow.
common. So to help with the transition, so it didn't feel like it was over yet. I was like, I still have so much work ahead of me. And now I have a boss. I haven't had a boss in a really long time. That's
Yeah, we sold a restaurant a couple years ago and we stayed on for a month afterwards to help the new owners through the transition. And it was the hardest thing ever to no longer be in control, but you're
yeah.
still there doing the same thing you were doing before. It's like the weirdest feeling.
It's very strange and like still unclear, like
Yeah.
what do I have a say in? What don't I have a say in? I used to do this, now I'm not doing this. And so it was a weird, year, I think the first 6 months of that were really stressful. And then the next 6 months, after all the big stuff had happened, like switching our payroll, and we had to switch like our electronic health record, which is, if you're a therapist or if you're a chiropractor, anybody in the health field knows, like that's where everything is. That's where you do your billing and all your charting. So moving that is a big deal and it's very stressful. And once we did that, it was like, okay, it was smooth sailing. I got my caseload down to 7 people. The team was a little bit smaller, so I just had less to do. And I really appreciated that because that kind of gave me some space to just heal a little bit and start to prepare myself for the next thing.
Yeah. So what was the next thing?
So I have been doing like coaching and consulting and training before, but that just seemed like the next natural move. So I went full time doing that in 2022. No, 2023. Last year was my first full year. And yeah, last year was a little rough. This year is a lot better. I forgot what it was like to start all over. So there was that. Like, oh my God, so
Yeah, yeah.
exciting.
Work out all the like kinks and yeah.
And I think I was still really figuring out like exactly what I wanted. I didn't really have clarity. I was just like, oh, I'm in coaching therapists and business owners on how to scale their business. I'm going to keep doing that. And I did keep doing that and I'm really good at that, but I was just replacing therapy clients with coaching clients.
Okay.
And it's like, that's not what I want to do. I don't do therapy anymore. I stopped doing that. I don't want to do that. I've expanded and changed things a lot. Now I have courses, and then of course I have retreats. And I think that was really pivotal for me because it allows me to still help people, which is really important to me and my purpose, but it's condensed. It's 6 days. And then then I'm done.
Yeah.
I enjoy it and I feel good that I get to help people, but I don't have to sit with somebody an hour every single week. And I get to see the changes more quickly too.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, for somebody who's maybe facing a burnout currently, what are some of the signs that they can look for if they don't know they're facing a burnout? And then, what advice would you give for somebody in that position right now? Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radientresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon.
I think one of the biggest red flags that I also talked about too is apathy. So I talked about that, right? Where I was like, I don't care what this client is saying
Yeah.
to me right now. I also felt like that with my team. I was like, I don't care what they need. They can go fuck themselves. I don't want to answer this text, and that's not a good boss.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think if you're noticing behavioral changes are usually the easiest ones, like apathy. Maybe if you're somebody that, for me, I always procrastinate, so this doesn't really apply. But if you're somebody who is really good at doing your to-do list and now you're finding it's taking you longer, or you're not responding to people timely, or maybe you are always on time and now you're always late and you find like your fuse is a little bit shorter. Those are all easy ones to see, but there's also like a lot of physical changes that happen that I think we push to the side, like
Mm.
not sleeping well or getting headaches or getting sick really often. And those can be good indicators also. And so if you are feeling any of that, or you're listening to this and you're like, maybe that's something that's happening, I'm not sure. I think it's just really important to pause. We don't do that a lot. We are all going through the motions, we're on autopilot, we're doing all of the things, and you're not paying attention to the signs that your body is giving to you. By the time your head and your brain catch up with what your body was trying to tell you,
Mm.
it's already been happening for quite a while. So, starting to just slow down, pay attention, give yourself permission to rest, to take longer if you need to, and to I'm like, I have so many things to say. I think the other thing I will say too is that when we talk about self-care, everybody's like, oh, get a massage and light a candle. And those things are nice. I like those things. But after the massage, your emails are still there. Your boss is
Mm.
still there. Your job is still there. So you need to find ways to manage that in the day to day. And that's what true self-care is.
What are some self-care ideas that you have then that are different from those standard? Get a massage, get a pedicure, get your hair done, whatever.
Yes. So I think really, again, like slowing down, knowing your boundaries, knowing what it feels like when somebody pushes your boundaries, and doing small things every single day that make you feel good. So I actually think Kellen talked about this in her episode, but glimmers are little micro moments of joy. And you might think if I pet my dog, because I love my dog, that's one of my glimmers, and that makes me feel good for 10 seconds, that's not going to fix everything.
Mm.
It's not going to fix everything, but what it does is it, on a high level, puts your body, your nervous system into a state where you are more grounded, more present, and you're able to use your prefrontal cortex, which is really important. That's where we make rational decisions. And the more you do things like that, the bigger that muscle gets. So you're in that place of being compassionate and curious and grounded more. And that window gets a lot bigger. And it takes more for you to get triggered. It takes more for you to get stressed. And when you're there, you're able to access and get back to a place of groundedness more quickly. So that can be things like, again, whatever, glimmers, little small things that make you feel good. Mine are like making my coffee in the morning is like a ritual,
Mm.
and I love that. The way that the sun comes in my bedroom at sunset is really beautiful, and I always try and look at that every single day. And just having those practices for you to, again, make yourself thrive. You don't need to have some huge, like, mindfulness meditation routine unless you want to. But for most of us, that feels really overwhelming. I'm not going to get up at 5 a.m. and meditate for 30 minutes and then journal and then go for a walk and then do all of these things. Pick one small
Mm.
thing, do it 3 times a week for 3 minutes and see where that gets you.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I love all these suggestions too, because the whole, as like you said, as lovely as a massage is or whatever, like we're also in a bit of a tough economy right now, and not everybody can afford to just fork out money for all of those type of self-care things. And all these suggestions that you're giving are little simple things that people can just do on their own at home, and just whatever little things make them happy.
Yeah, and I think that's really important about this whole conversation too, is that self-care is very privileged. When we think of self-care, yes, massages and going on a vacation, like not
Yeah.
everybody can access that, but we all have access to your own nervous system. And
Mm.
actually, the quickest way to put yourself again in that place of, we call it rest and digest or safe and connected, is to just take a deep breath, just one. And that's very simple.
Mm.
And pretty much everybody can do that. There's a couple of
Yeah.
people with medical issues, right, that might not be accessible to you, but I have other ideas. But most of us can take one deep breath, and that's all you have to do, just one. And you can start there.
Oh, I love that. Those are great. Can you tell me more of what is EMDR and polyvagal stuff? Tell me more about that.
Yes. So EMDR stands for eye motion desensitization reprocessing, and that is a therapy modality that came out to at first treat single incident trauma, but now we use it for a lot of other things. And essentially, we use eye movements or bilateral stimulation, which means you can do tapping, but it basically just means your eyes need to cross over the midline of your body back and forth. And when that little cross happens, there's still a lot of research out on this, but there's something that happens in our brain and it reprocesses things. So we take memories or even negative core beliefs that you have and you reprocess them to be neutral or hopefully positive if you can get there. Like how I think about this is think of your brain as like a big filing cabinet and you pull the drawer out and there's all those like little files in there. And you can take it out, and some of them are nice. You take it out, and this one is like your wedding day, and you feel really good about that when you think about it. Then you close it and you put it back in and you close the drawer. But some things in those little file folders are more upsetting. Maybe there was a car accident or some other sort of trauma that happened in your life. And when you try and shove that file folder back in the drawer, it doesn't go in. It's like getting stuck and you're trying to close the door, but you can't. And so EMDR takes that one and puts it back in nicely. And that way you can access it whenever you want or not. And when you think about it, it's not as upsetting. Um, so that's what EMDR is. And again, I think people oftentimes think of that as, oh, that is something for, again, a one-time trauma, like a car accident or like I got robbed. But it can be for anything. And it can
Okay.
be for negative self-belief too. I highly recommend that. And it's very powerful what you can get out of that. And I've done it before as a client too. So I've done it on both ends. And then polyvagal theory also goes along with this, but this is a theory that to me is the foundation for everything because we
Okay.
all have a nervous system.
Yes.
And polyvagal theory talks about our automatic or autonomic nervous system and that we have basically three pathways for stress responses. So our nervous system is taking in everything around us and then responding. For example, people who are listening to this right now, your nervous system is reacting to me and Tawny's voice actually, and then having a response to that. So when we're thinking about we get triggered because our
Mhm.
nervous system, our body is taking in information in our environment, both internally and externally, and then having a response to that. If you or somebody listening to this has ever had that feeling where you get really triggered and you're like, why am I so upset about that? That's so stupid. Well, your brain thinks that, but your body is saying, oh, we've been here before and it's not safe. And we're going to have
Mm.
a response to that. So, this theory just talks about how this helps us regulate our emotions and manage our stress more effectively. And that's what I teach in my retreats and a lot of my coaching and training too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Both of those things. I've heard of the AMDR before, but I've never actually done any of it, but I've heard of it and it sounds super fascinating to me. So,
It's really amazing and it's having a resurgence right now, which I'm very happy about. And you can also do intensives for that too, which I know might sound intense, but sometimes that's more accessible to people where you just go and you do a shitload of EMDR and therapy, like 6 hours, and then you're done.
wow.
So that's also an option. But also, if you're listening to this, I want you to know that doing EMDR, there is a ton of training that we go through as therapists, and part of our job is to understand what your system is ready for and what it's not ready for. And so we do a lot of work with you on we call resourcing and making sure you have things to help regulate, so to speak. And there's 8 phases to it also. So a lot of people, same thing. They're like, oh, I've heard of EMDR. It's like where you do this thing with your eyes. That's only one of the 8 phases. So there's whole process that we go through to make sure that you're ready and it's safe.
That's so interesting. Before we started recording, you mentioned maybe that you struggle with a little bit of ADHD. So I want to back up a little bit and go talk about that a little bit because I think there's probably a lot of listeners out there that maybe are struggling with ADHD or maybe have it and they don't know that they have it and stuff like that. So tell me about your journey with ADHD.
I never really thought that I had it until a lot of us, partially TikTok, but I'll come back to that. The first red flag was This was also in, this might have been early 2022, maybe. I can't remember, somewhere around there. And I was doing a training for a friend who's also a therapist, and she runs like a membership community. And she was like, "Are your slides ready yet for this training tomorrow?" And I'm like, "No, but I'll get them to you like before." And she's, "Wow, you're really procrastinating. How ADHD of you." And even though I'm a therapist, I didn't have any training in neurodivergence. And I was like, "Oh, do ADHD people procrastinate? I didn't know that." So that was like the first little indicator, which is something I've struggled with my whole life. I've always procrastinated. And then again, TikTok. Then TikTok, of course, starts like serving me videos. And I'm like, wait, do I have
You have
ADHD?
ADHD. Look at this video.
And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be one of those people that diagnoses myself from TikTok. But the other thing that helped me was a friend of mine who's also a therapist that I met on a retreat that also has ADHD. We had gotten really close, and a lot of times when I would tell her about things I was struggling with, she's, "You're one of us. You need to go get tested. I'm telling you." I'm like, okay. So I did. And I do. I was diagnosed with ADHD inattentive type 2 years ago. So when I was 35, which is not uncommon in women either. And that was really life changing for me because I feel like so many of the things that I find difficult or I always thought were just like weird quirks or I thought everybody else also struggled with, I've learned are ADHD. And that helps me most of the time. Of course, it's always a journey, but that helps me as a business owner make accommodations for myself. And so I'm very privileged that I get to work for myself because there are things I know about my system that I get overstimulated. I know that I don't do well first thing in the morning. Like I'm awake early, but I don't like to have meetings until at least 10 a.m. So I know I need a slow morning where I can have my coffee and go for a walk and not feel rushed. And I also know that if I do something like this, where I'm like doing a lot of social output or I'm doing a training or retreat, I know this is it for the day. This is my big thing for the day is recording this
Yeah.
podcast.
Oh,
I do
yay.
intentionally because I'm like, I couldn't do this podcast and then go and try and do a 2 hour training. That's too much for me. And that goes along with polyvagal theory. I understand my nervous system and I work in a way that supports that. And I also, it's even more important for us to be in tune with our body if you're neurodivergent because we're in our heads a lot. So we also, that's another thing that I had learned through all of this. Like we don't have interoception, which means like we don't really get the signals from our body that people get. So that's why we're like holding our pee for 3 hours. That's why I'm like, oh, it's 3 o'clock and I'm hungry. I haven't eaten today. It's
Mm.
a little bit longer for those things to catch up. So it's even more important if you're neurodivergent, or maybe you think you are and you're listening to this, to start to build that awareness of what your body is telling you because it's giving you a lot of insight that you might not be paying attention to that's causing you a lot more stress.
I do think it's really interesting when you start to pay attention to your body and be more aware of that because I think me especially, I can look back on my life and like in my 20s, I didn't pay attention to any of that stuff. But as I've gotten older and into my 30s and I've struggled with my own life stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, this all makes sense now. And it's funny the things you start to pick up on when you start paying attention.
It seems so simple and easy, but it's not. And it really does make a difference. Like I know even, again, I just understand my own triggers and how I need to do things. And I try and give myself grace when I say things like should. I'm like, oh, I should really get up and work right now. I should do more. I'm like, should I? Or am I feeling tired and I just need to decompress for a little bit? And that's not an emergency and I can do it tomorrow and that's okay. And that those types of like reframes have really helped me. And I think it helps with communication too. Like I know when I'm triggered, if somebody says something to me, actually, this is a good example. This happened to me like 2 weeks ago because I live in Florida, directly where all the hurricanes have been hitting.
Yes. And at the time we're recording this, there's been some doozies this year.
So the last one, Milton, we ended up evacuating, and
Mm.
I was in a hotel in a not fun part of Miami, like very inland. And it was the day of, it was like that Wednesday, and another therapist had messaged me, and this is not her fault, this is my own stuff. And she had messaged me and she had asked me, do you have space to hold like post hurricane processing sessions? And she meant, do I like personally want to do them with people? And also, do I know somebody with a physical space where we could hold them? And this is like the day of, and I'm like, I was very triggered by her comment. I'm like, and I wanted to be like, how dare you ask me to do this today? Like, I'm freaking out about my house and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And I was already starting to get a little snippy with her. I could tell. So I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to respond. And I did. I left it. And 3 days later, I came back and I was able to respond to her in a place that was a little bit more compassionate, which I couldn't access when I was triggered. And I just, to me, that was a big deal. So I actually recognize this in myself and I know I shouldn't
Yeah.
respond right now. So it's little things like that add up to a lot of really big changes in your life.
Yeah, I think with that example specifically, I think that's been one of the most helpful things I've learned is that you don't have to respond right away to a lot of that stuff. And you do need to listen to your body and your heart and soul. And as much as I think we live in a society where it's you have to respond, we have to move quickly all the time. You have to respond to this, you have to respond to that, but you don't actually have to. And I react very dramatically in the moment.
Yeah, me too. The same way.
Physically, emotionally, mentally, it's like in the moment, I just like my whole body has a reaction to that stuff sometimes, and depending on the situation. And I have learned that waiting until I chill out a minute and I will respond so much better, and everything will be better because I gave myself that time. It's so important.
I was listening to the episode with you and Kellen about the retreat, and you were talking about how you basically like how you fight with your husband, and I'm the exact same way. I was like, oh, I totally relate to that because that's exactly how I am.
Yeah, yeah, it's bad, but it's
But
okay.
we know that. It's important to
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Sometimes I just have to walk away. I just have to. So, what are some signs if somebody that may or may not have ADHD to look for? You mentioned a couple, but do you have a list of ones that you can tell people to pay attention to?
I think especially if you are a woman and especially if you I think there's like this idea or stereotype that it's like ADHD, like bouncing off the walls, like little 5-year-old boys. And
Yeah.
I'm not like that. And but there is a lot of hyperactivity happening, but it's all internal. So I think some things are like the procrastination for me and a lot of us, the self-doubt and the shame are also
Mm,
huge with ADHD. Also, people pleasing
mm,
because we've had to mask. We feel like we can't be our authentic selves. We need to perform a certain way to get people to like us or to fit in. That's like another big piece of it. Impulsivity, and that can look so different. That could be with food, that could be with shopping, that could be with making decisions. I'm trying to think of what else off the top of my head, but those are
mm,
like ones that come to mind. But I think also like this shame spirals that come with
mm.
ADHD can be really debilitating. And that was something else. Procrastination, forgetfulness.
Yeah.
Also think that I like the overwhelm is really
Mm,
big for me. And speaking of TikTok, I saw a video yesterday and I was like, oh, that's totally it. I think people with ADHD, we think of all the steps to something at once. And really,
mm.
this TikTok video, she was talking about making a sandwich. She's, I literally had to talk to myself, like, get the bread, put the bread in the toaster, toast the bread. Instead, we're thinking of, oh, I gotta cut the tomatoes and I gotta get the lettuce and the turkey and I gotta toast the bread. It's like one thing at a time.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I definitely think like that. I think like the hyper focus, not being able to initiate tasks, which kind of goes with my procrastination. And again, how I've solved this, the not being able to initiate is again, this is privileged, but I have a virtual assistant in my business. And so a lot of those things I just delegate.
Mm, nice.
Some of those things I can't delegate, and I just have to force myself. And I'm like, or I like make up a little game I'm like, let's see how many of these I can knock out in the next 10 minutes. And then I feel accomplished.
Nice.
And I also think, and I might have cut out during this part too, like the shame spirals, which I also thought were normal, are a really big part of ADHD too, and just like the masking that has gone along with it. And
And what
one of
is a shame spiral for those who are listening that may not know?
to me, it's like when I feel bad about something or I made a mistake, or even
Oh.
sometimes, and I actually feel this very deeply after retreats, I second guess everything.
Mm.
Oh, now I'm home. I bet everybody had a terrible time. Somebody
Oh.
to me. Somebody is going to say that it ruined their life. I shouldn't have talked so much about this. I shouldn't have acted this way. I should have done this. Blah, blah. I really just spiral about all of those things. And I also think that actually this is important too. Goes along with something that people with ADHD experience called rejection sensitive dysphoria,
Hmm.
RSD. And that basically, because we're very sensitive souls, we have very sensitive nervous systems. When somebody criticizes us, and not always, but oftentimes it is like it's a wound. Like it's not just, oh, that person said something and it bothered me. It's truly a wound. It's like trauma, and it really deeply hurts us, and we ruminate and obsess over it. And so I think that also was something I thought that was normal. I was like, oh, I'm just like sensitive to criticism. But yeah, sometimes it is like I've worked through that a lot too, but it can be traumatizing.
Yeah. I've had experiences. Um, I've been doing hair for 20 years, and I've always struggled with this, but I've had some real doozies recently of clients who have left me and for a multitude of reasons, whether it was money, whether it was scheduling, whether it was whatever. And I've taken it so to heart.
Hard and it
It
hurts.
hurts. It is. It's like it is traumatizing and it's such a loss. It's such a loss in that regard too. So I really struggle with that, but I'm working through that. So we'll see.
It's hard. I was doing actually yesterday I did a really cool reading with somebody, and it's like half intuitive reading, half human design. And we were talking about this for some reason. I don't remember how it came up. And she was like, yeah, was that really that? Or was that through the lens of your trauma? And that's why you feel that way.
Mm.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out. But
Oh.
you're right.
So what for somebody who's struggling with like how do you get out of that shame spiral or the what do you recommend for like when you're done with the retreat and you think that everybody's just hating on you and thinks the worst of you? How do you pull yourself out of that?
For retreats, I do what I tell everybody who attends to do, and that is to give yourself time off after and to slowly integrate back into society. And I know, again, that's like a privilege. Not everybody can take more time off to do that, but it really helps. And I do that for myself. I always make sure that, and especially for me, that's my job. So I give myself like 3 days at least to get home and settle back in. And I usually stay longer. So in Belize, I added, this time I only added like 2 or 3 days in Belize, and then I came home and still had the day or two. In my first retreat in January, had like an extra 5 days
Okay.
and that was my vacation afterwards. So that really helps me. And just the awareness, like, why is this coming up? What does it mean? I also really find parts work helpful, which is like another therapy modality where you assign parts of yourself to all of these things. So I know there's a part of me that feels like I didn't do good enough. And there's also a part of me that's amazing. You did so good. Like you did this big thing. And so I talk to that other part who's a little bit more protective and afraid. And what do you need right now? What do you need to feel safe right now? But you have to feel those things to move through them. And
Hmm.
ADHDers and just a lot of people in general, we like to repress. We don't want to deal with uncomfortable
Yeah.
feelings, but you have to. And so I give myself space to do that. And I also allow myself to do it authentically, which can be really hard sometimes because that might include things like crying or calling somebody and being really vulnerable and being like, can I talk through this with you? But having those safe people is also hugely important in your life. And that's one of the best ways to help regulate yourself too.
I love that. That's great. So you've done 2 retreats now then, is that what you said?
I've done two on my own and I've co-hosted and spoken at a bunch of others, which feels different. It's different when you have to, when you're responsible for everything, it's different.
Yeah. How do you like doing those retreats?
I love them. And I have learned so much about myself and also just about how powerful they are. I think that they're becoming more and more popular now. And I think people are like, is this really worth it? Like, it's so much money. Why should I like spend money to go out of the country with some stranger I've never met for 6 days or whatever? And I just like the life change that you will get from that.
Mm.
It it will be there for years and years to come because they are special and they're sacred, and you don't get time in your regular life to do the things that you do on a retreat. And so I love being able to facilitate them, and it feels very aligned with my purpose and my values to be able to help people in a more condensed way, and also in a way where I feel like I have more control and I can do the things that I like to do. I like doing expressive arts therapy with people. I like doing sound healing, and I'm like, we can do whatever. And we also get to do it in a really beautiful place and meet new people.
How did you begin to start doing them in Belize?
I was already doing coaching and consulting and training and all that. And I do it on a lot of things, but obviously, one of my niches is burnout prevention. And so, a lot of people were obviously asking for that. They're like, we need a retreat on burnout, like my audience and just people that I knew. So, I started to build it. And then I was like, I want to do it somewhere that's easy to get to from North America. And everybody goes to Costa Rica, and I love Costa Rica, and I'm actually going to host there next year.
Oh,
But
nice.
it's like I want something different.
Yeah.
And I went to Belize in 2019 on vacation, and I just loved it. It's like a little bit more crunchier than Costa Rica. And again, it's easy to get to. The people are very warm, very inviting. There's really rich Mayan culture there, which I also
Mm.
love, and lots of healing practices that are done there. So I actually just reached out to the resort that I vacationed with, and I was like, I want to host a retreat. Would you help me? And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, we have a whole retreats department. So
Oh,
that
wow.
helped. Some people do them like all kind of a la carte, and you rent an Airbnb. If anybody is listening to this and you're thinking about hosting a retreat, doing it like through Belize retreats, which is where I've hosted, is really nice because they do a lot of the heavy lifting. It's all inclusive. They manage the airport transfers. Like all I have to really do is plan my itinerary and the excursions and then show up and lead it. But they help with setting it up and a lot of the logistics, which is
That's
nice.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, makes it easier for me.
Nice. Geez, you are one busy woman.
I do a lot of things. I am the definition of multi-passionate, and I'm also a generator in human design. So that means I need to do things that make me excited. And also, I think my ADHD so it works for me. And I think that's one of the other things people ask me is they're like, you talk about burnout, but you do all these different things. How are you not burnt out? And I really have good systems in place, and I have a business manager, I have a virtual assistant, and I delegate a lot of the stuff so that I can do the things that I'm really good at and that I can be a visionary in and build, and they do a lot of the shit on the back end that I don't like doing.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think that's really important. It's so hard when you're running your own business to let go of that control, though.
Yes, that is another thing that comes up constantly when I'm coaching and consulting people. But
Yeah.
it's important. If you're going to be a CEO, you should not be the one worrying about if the water delivery came to your office today. Especially, I think about that with a lot of the therapists I work with who are running group practices that are quite large. And I'm like, why are you still doing all this day to day? That's why you're burnt out. And you have
Hmm.
to find ways to let go. If something can be done at 80% of what you would do and it wouldn't get super fucked up, then that's something you can delegate.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said too about when you're doing stuff that lights you up too. Like, even though you're doing a million other things, like if it all lights you up and it all feels good, then it's not going to burn you out as quickly.
Exactly. I think there's some people where, actually when I was in Belize, I met this couple and they were like, "Oh yeah," I asked them what they did for work and I don't know, they had some like corporate job and they were like, it's not exciting, but it pays the bills and it allows us to travel." And I can't do that. I cannot work a job that I'm not passionate about. That just does not work for me. So it might work for some people, but I need to find a way to get excited about what I'm doing. And when I do that, it brings abundance.
So what does it look like to work with you?
You have lots of options.
Yeah. Tell us all the options, and I'll link a bunch of stuff in the show notes too, but give us a brief overview of if somebody's listening to this and they're like, "Oh, I really like this girl. How do I work with her?"
You can come on a retreat with me. I'm hosting again in January, specifically for neurodivergent entrepreneurs. That one is sold out, and that's in Belize. And then I am planning two more in 2025, probably in Puerto Rico and Costa Rica. So you can just get on my email list through my website. And if you're interested in business coaching or consulting on how to scale your business, how to add income streams, how to have more of a CEO mindset, or coaching, training, consulting on burnout prevention and more mind body stuff with polyvagal theory, I can do that for you too.
Amazing. Yeah. I do want to ask one more thing before I let you go. I was looking at your topics you want to discuss. You put on there chronic illness. Is that something that you've struggled with or just something you've worked with people on?
Both. So in my private practice, I worked with patients or clients who struggle with chronic illness, and then I also struggle with Hashimoto's and a little, we don't really know, which is common in autoimmune disorders.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's another piece that I focus on and help with. And I think also there's a high incidence of being neurodivergent and having chronic illness. And so,
Oh,
kind of the intersection of those and being an entrepreneur, I think all of that is really important. And it all really goes back to nervous system regulation and polyvagal theory, what I was talking about earlier.
interesting. Okay. I'm sorry that you've had to deal with chronic illnesses, but it sounds like you're managing it okay. So
I
hopefully.
do my best. And I think that's, again, like the privilege of being self-employed, but also worked really hard to build up some other more passive income streams that help support me in times when maybe I'm like, I don't really have too bad of flare-ups anymore, but times where I just need to be more like in a resting season. And again, I just know that about myself, but it's really important if you do have chronic illness to have good supports in place, both from systems that make your life work better and also people who get you, who listen to you, and who you can lean on.
Yeah. I think having your circle is huge. And when you're talking about the retreats and stuff, being around other like-minded people that are literally just there to heal themselves as well as connect with others that are of the same mindset. Because if you're going all the way to the point of doing those retreats, you're looking to do the work. You're not somebody that's just, oh, I'm just here for a quick little thing, like, so
Exactly.
everybody's there to do it. I haven't done your retreat yet, but I've done a couple of retreats in my past, and they've just been incredible experiences. So I definitely am a huge proponent for those and highly recommend them to anybody who's looking for some intensive healing.
They really are incredible. I go on retreats myself too because I need them too. And
Yeah.
I don't know, they're just, again, it's like special and sacred, and you are with like-minded people and people who are there who are serious to do the work. Because again, you're not going to pay all that money and take time off of your job if you're not serious about it. But
Yeah.
um, it's huge. You need safe people to heal trauma. That's how we heal
Mm.
trauma.
Ooh, that's a good one. Do you have any other parting words before we close out here? That was a good one, but I'm just curious if you got any other gold nuggets in there.
Yeah, that was a good one. I think, what else could I say? I guess when I think about like nervous system regulation and healing our nervous system too, Deb Dana, she's an LCSW who has done a lot of work with polyvagal theory, and she says that trauma replaces patterns of connection with patterns of protection in our nervous system. So hopefully that helps anybody who's listening to get rid of some of the shame of how we might respond to certain situations, to know that your system is just acting in a way to protect you. It's not your fault.
Oh, yeah, that's good. All right, my friend. This has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and being a guest. I know Kellen has talked about you a lot, so I'm really excited that we finally got to meet face to face on Zoom.
These days.
Yeah, maybe someday we'll meet actually in person. But yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared. And I hope that people listening got some gold nuggets out of this. I think it was a really good conversation. So thank you.
You. It's all my favorite topics to talk about. So I really appreciate you having me. And I think it was a good convo. And I
Yeah.
hope that people enjoy, and let us know your feedback. We want to know,
Yeah.
right? Did you find
Yes,
it
always.
helpful?
Yes, please let me know any feedback. If anybody's listening that needs to give me as a host too feedback, I'm always game for that. So it's the only way we get better, right?
Exactly.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.